Edition here on the CLNS Media Network. It is Brian Hines from Pat's Pulpit, joined by Taylor Kyles today. CLNS's own, our wonderful Taylor, filling in for Barth today, who is a little under the weather, doesn't have his voice fully, so he's resting up, hoping he doesn't get Wally pipped by Taylor here. He should be back soon, but
I got the red gloves ready. I got him.
We're gonna have to give you a Julian Edelman-esque punt return, maybe to. But thank you for joining us today. I know we had to pull you from some Drake Maye film on Twitter there you were posting, which we all know I love the Drake Maye film. But thanks for joining us today because we have a lot to talk about because we haven't been live on this show actually since last week, and at that time, Bill O'Brien was still the Patriots offensive coordinator. So we have a lot to talk about here. So let's just start off right away with Billy O, who left his contract here in New England, went back to the collegiate level. He took the offensive coordinator job at Ohio State. So it obviously didn't work here last year, right? He came back to get this offense back on track, kind of rejuvenate Mac Jones's career. That all went south. So Billy O is out, and we have this kind of full-blown offensive coordinator search going on. So when that news kind of broke, what were your kind of main reactions? And then we can get into a little bit of these candidates that they've been interviewing this past week.
Yeah, well, initially, I mean, it's kind of what I'd been feeling for a while, that I thought it was pretty unfair how everything with Bill O'Brien kind of worked out, where he was put in a tough spot where the offensive line obviously was in shatters. Like there was no really good offensive tackle play outside of once they finally settled on Mike Nwenu. And then Trent Brown really got rolled up on against the Bills, and then that kind of went down the toilet. In the interior of the offensive line, the guard spots were just all over the place, even with City. So then left guard Cole Strange gets hurt. And then the receiver situation where, it was up and down. You had Pop, who was your star, but he's still a rookie. His route running was all over the place. Devontae Parker and Juju, sometimes their effort wasn't really there, the technical aspects. So it wasn't really fair, I think, to gauge how good Bill O'Brien could be and what he could do to maximize Mac Jones's talent. I thought he was doing some good things, though. I really did think he was trying to adapt and incorporate some new things. But at the same time, he wasn't perfect either. I think the Patriots are like top 5 in delay game penalties in the league because they have a very lengthy pre-snap checklist, which we asked them about a lot. And you want to give your quarterbacks options, but you also don't want to make it so that, you're getting penalized because it takes so long to get through everything or overloading them. And then there were like weekly occurrences where receivers were really tight in the same areas where you're not sure if that's, receivers releasing the wrong way, where if, you take an outside release instead of an inside release, then you got two guys who are right next to each other. But he always took accountability. That's one thing, talking to him. I really enjoyed those times that we got when he was speaking to the media, because he was always transparent. He was always accountable. But he, still kept the veil as much as he could in, a way that he had to respect. So there was a point where I was like, I wish I could have seen how he did with a better quarterback and a better offense. But at the same time, it's exciting, especially now, because you got all these McVay guys interviewing, and it's clear the Patriots are going in that direction. So I'm not sure if that was the plan all along, like how seriously they thought Bill O'Brien was in terms of coming back. And again, at the time, I was like, that sucks for Bill, but still, hey, at least we get to see what this offense looks like under new leadership. So, bittersweet for sure, but the sweet outweighs the bitterness for sure, because now we get to see some McVay influence.
Fresh blood in here. And I agree with you a lot. Like, Billy O's a good coach, right? It didn't go great this year, but he's a good football coach. And you kind of feel bad in a way because he was excited to come back here. He says it all the time. He loves coaching here. He loves coaching under Bill, and his family's here. So I think he came back here with the idea that he'd stay here a few years and they'd have success, but didn't go that way. And I think there was maybe a path that he could have stayed, but he kind of looked at all this change and how hard that year before and kind of just assumed it might be best for him to go elsewhere, back to the collegiate level. But you hit the nail on the head there with kind of this fresh start. And I know people hate the word on Twitter, a modern offense, and but we talked about this system so much, and you even mentioned that pre-snap checklist that you see Mac Jones up at the line of scrimmage. He's calling out protection, dishing all these hand signals, and that's even before the ball is snapped. After is a whole nother world where you have to be on the same page as all your receivers and all. It seems like now is just a good time to maybe revamp this system, especially when you have a young quarterback, you assume with the third overall pick coming in here, maybe make life a little bit easier on him. And then talk about you're going to need new wide receivers, and they haven't been able to develop wide receivers in ages, it feels like. And you wonder how much of that system had to do with maybe some of that. You hear guys, even an established vet like Juju, first time we spoke to him back in April or May, he said he got like a college degree in football because of how hard this is. So it seems like they're headed in kind of a new direction with all these, offensive coordinator interviews. It's Zach
Mhm.
Robinson, Nick Caley, who we know Nick Caley, but he just spent the year in LA. Zach Robinson has obviously been groomed under Sean McVay in LA. They interviewed Shane Waldron, who ultimately he took the job with the Bears, but he's another one of those bred under Sean McVay. And who was the last one? Dan Pitcher, the
Yeah.
Bengals quarterback coach, another one of those. He worked under Zach Taylor, who worked under Sean McVay. So it really looks like they're headed kind of to that Sean McVay tree with this offensive coordinator hire.
Yeah, and I mean, especially with Zach Robinson and Nick Caley, even if they do get those guys, one thing, and Albert Breer reported this yesterday, they're probably going to bring in somebody who's had head coaching experience or like a senior offensive advisor. I do think to a degree it's overblown when we talk about, they've never called plays before. Zach Robinson has called a couple preseason games for the Rams. So, at least he has that under his belt. Like, it's not like he has never done it in his professional career. But I did think it was interesting that they could still even bring somebody else in, which I think is smart for a staff that's so young. Like, I think Tem Lukabu is the only guy that they've interviewed who's 40 years old or over. So, it's exciting and it's interesting because Gerard Mayo's obviously a young guy, and you see with the McVay tree kind of preaches a lot of what Gerard Mayo said he wanted for the team. It's much more communication. It's making guys feel invested, like they have some stake in the game plans and everything, and like they're really a part of it, kind of giving them the keys once they're on the field. And also, as the Patriots always do, he said that they still want to be a game plan team where they change week to week. And the McVay system, I know people talk about how, are they going to bring Mike and Nwenu back, for example, because they run a lot of outside zone. McVay went from being a primarily or very heavy outside zone team, in the Super Bowl with Todd Gurley and all that. He adapted to his personnel and also how defenses were playing him. They ran more duo or man blocking schemes than anybody in the league, and the Patriots are right behind them. So they're not stuck in their ways. They've done a very good job of, tweaking things about their scheme to give themselves an advantage. And obviously on a roster with the Patriots where you're probably going to have a lot of young players, they already do have quite a few young players, especially when you look at the free agents and guys that might leave, and their ability to develop those guys. So it's a really exciting time. There's also some candidates that we may not know about, like they interviewed Shane Waldron. We didn't even hear about that until yesterday. He already took the Bears offensive coordinator job. So yeah, it's again, it's a fun time in Foxborough because everyone's been pining for this, Shanahan-ian McVay type of thing. And, Shanahan has evolved as well, but McVay, I feel like, is the poster child for, you thought we were this a few years ago, and then you look at where they are now, and it's like, whoa, this is a lot of things are the same, but stylistically, you look at the tape, and there's a lot of things that are also very different.
Yeah, the run game is a great point because you look at like the Dolphins this year, like they were a really explosive run game, but it was a lot of that kind of zone stuff. Obviously, Mike McDaniel is in that Shanahan McVay tree, and then that's how really McVay won the Super Bowl, was that offense kind of unlocked. Obviously, they got Stafford, but they went down to more of that traditional, duo runs and some of that. So they can evolve, and it is encouraging to see these guys in. I was just
And you
looking at
mentioned
it.
Stafford even real quick, but like you mentioned Stafford, talk about how they also adapted from Goff to him. Like
Yeah.
they made sure to maximize his talents, whereas Goff, as we've seen, throughout his time in Detroit and LA, his bread and butter are those in cuts over the intermediate middle of the field. Like that's what he's hitting constantly. And with Stafford, he isn't really as confined. He does a great job manipulating defenses, throwing all over the field. He can hit you deep with these crazy, really long throws. And McVay adapted his offense to make sure that he maximized those talents. So again, just another element of like, this is not the same Rams offense necessarily that, Patriots fans saw get shut down in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was just like, I'm sure you put together your list of candidates for offensive coordinator right when after Bill O'Brien left. I was just like, when's the last time we put out those candidates list? And it's like, oh, they interviewed this guy, and then this guy, and then this guy, that like it's all these guys that we wanted to see them bring in, and it is kind of exciting. So I'll ask you, all these guys that they have interviewed, or maybe someone who they might be interviewing that you're looking at, like do you have a clear cut favorite, or is there one or two above above the rest, and maybe one guy who's not on these lists that you still want to see kind of come in here and interview for this OC spot?
It's the basic pick, but I'm also just not going to overthink it. Like, it's Zach Robinson.
Yep.
One, you look at how much attention he's getting. Like, that's pretty significant. If he's getting all these interviews, and there's very clearly a reason. Young guy. I mean, he doesn't have the Patriots ties. It's like, yeah, he got drafted by the Patriots. He didn't make it out of camp. He never
like 3 months. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, he's not really very much a Patriots kind of guy, but he's been in that Rams system for a long time. The quarterback experience, I think, is huge, considering they're probably going to draft a young quarterback. It's someone who can see the game through their eyes, and also, I was watching an interview he did. I think it was the beginning of last season, maybe 2 seasons ago. And just the way that he communicates, like I'm probably going to use this word a lot, and it's one that I keep using when I talk about the Rams, but it really is big. When you look at everything with Bill, he communicates very well, but in terms of kind of getting down to your level and relating to players, there was a disparity there. And, it's fine on defense, but for the offensive players, it started to create some friction, and you saw that it didn't work out so well. So, yeah, I think Robinson is definitely the most exciting candidate. He's a pass game coordinator. So I think if you get an offensive line coach, maybe you bring in Nick Caley as well. Maybe he could be a run game coordinator to kind of help out with that aspect. But I just think he's probably one of the most ideal candidates in terms of his history, the kind of things he can bring. And just the fact that they're not really looking outside of that tree. Like, you got Bo Hardaway and Josh McDaniels, obviously, who they both have the New England ties. And Nick Caley still is a New England guy. But Gerard Mayo was in his interview process as well and saw and clearly thought enough of him to bring him back. So I think it was Zach Cox yesterday on Pat's Daily said that he had like a study abroad in LA, which is like, yeah, it's kind of exactly what it was, being able to incorporate those influences. But yeah, I got to put Zach Robinson at the top of the list just for a lot of the obvious reasons.
Yeah, I'm with you too. And I think just the fact that he was a quarterback is such a big part of this, considering you're probably using that number 3 pick on a quarterback. And you look at, the history here, the quarterback coach has been Josh McDaniels, and then Joe Judge for a year, and then it's been Bill O'Brien, and Evan Rothstein has mixed in with all these guys the last few years. And it's like Josh and Billy O, they're good coaches, but they weren't quarterbacks, right? And if you could get an actual quarterback in there, because for as good as these top 3 prospects are, they're not perfect. No prospect is perfect. These guys are going to need their corrections, especially some of them with, footwork and type of stuff like that. So if you have a former quarterback just in the house that they can bounce ideas off and work on their fundamentals pretty much year round, right? They're going to be there whenever they need to. I think that would just be such a big benefit for them to have that in the building.
Absolutely. And especially because quarterbacks coaches, like, one of the bigger issues, especially with Mac, like we kept talking about his footwork and how that was kind of deteriorating. If you have an offense coordinator who's separate from the quarterbacks coach, it's just, you have to listen to 2 different people. Whereas if your coordinator is also teaching you and has the experience where, Josh McDaniels, he is a quarterbacks coach, but I'm sure he's, not giving you the same thing you'd get from like a trainer or someone that you go to in the offseason, but somebody who's played the position, like you said, just gives that much of a tighter influence in terms of them understanding you, what you might be going through. Something about footwork where, maybe you tweak the drops or the play calling based on how someone's more comfortable. So yeah, I think that if you have those 2 guys in the same role, that's just a huge advantage for a young quarterback.
Yeah, because you always hear these guys, they all have their QB coaches now, right? Like Jordan Palmer is a big one. I forget who Mac has, but Mac had someone else that they go see these guys in the off season. But if you can just have that in your building with these guys year round, that seems like a big advantage there. But he also mentioned Nick Caley maybe coming with Zach Robinson. I think that could be kind of the home run scenario here where maybe he's your tight ends coach, which is another lateral move, but maybe you give him run game coordinator as a title. So it kind of seems like a promotion. I think that would be perfect, because then you have Zach Robinson and you hope things go well, and he's probably going to be looking at head coaching interviews maybe next offseason or in 2 years. So then you would have that internal guy in Nick Caley to kind of promote, which they didn't do in 2022, and you saw how that goes. But I think that would be a home run move to bring Robinson as the OC, try to get Nick Caley back on this staff, and then you have your internal successor for him if you hope, again, things go well and Zach Robinson is taking head coaching interviews in a year or 2.
Plant the seed for a new McVay tree. Let's get it.
Yeah. And I'm sure they have an O-line coach or something they could bring into. I think the Rams, they had like the same assistant O-line coach for 7 years. So I don't know maybe if he's looking to get out of there or
Right.
something, but that you could establish kind of their own tree there in New England. That would be the home run play. But the other report was if you go with one of these young OCs like Zach Robinson, Albert Breer said they might want an experienced guy on top of that. You thinking Josh McDaniels, even though that's not the same system? Are you thinking we got the report from I think it was Diana Rossini who said a bunch of teams want Arthur Smith in the building, maybe Frank Reich. I don't know. Like who are these? Who could you see maybe as one of these veteran coaches, older assistants to kind of come in here and guide a young coach and coordinator?
Of those options, I'd probably go with Frank Reich. I feel like he's just been put in so many tough situations. I also really do like a lot of the things he did schematically when he was with the Colts, but then obviously with the Panthers, like it was just such a bad situation. And then you get another former quarterback in the building, someone
Yeah.
who has that unique perspective. Josh, I think is going to go if Bill gets a head coaching job, which is looking. It looked
No.
like it was locked in, and now not so much. But yeah, I mean, if you could bring Josh back, I think that would be pretty great. But also you wonder how things would mesh in terms of like the kind of differences in philosophies. That'd be kind of interesting to see how they marry whoever they get to be the coordinator with someone who'd be advising them. But I mean, Josh McDaniels is also a Super Bowl winning like play caller. Maybe, they have some different philosophies, but if they can find some way to mix, I know that people want to move on from the things from the past, and I understand that. But like Josh McDaniels' failures have been as a leader of an organization and as a leader of men, and that's not. And also in terms of scouting talent, and he's not going to be asked to do those things. He's going to be advising the coaches directly. Maybe some relationship with the players. I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think when he has a lot on his plate, he just kind of fumbles the bag and kind of just subconsciously reverts to his Belichickian ways, which has not worked out clearly. So yeah, I mean, Josh McDaniels, just in terms of somebody who has so much experience and has done it at the highest level, had a ton of success. And then Frank Reich is someone who has had a history of success in the league, has been a quarterback, and just really has been put into some really tough spots in the past couple seasons.
Yep. Last question for you, offensive side of the ball, and then we can get over to the defense. If they're going this McVay tree route, and you have your option for the sake of the experiment, you have your option of any quarterback at number 3 overall. Which one are you taking to run maybe Zach Robinson or Nick Caley's offense?
I feel like it's got to be Drake May. I think Jaden Daniels can fit in any system, but I mean, just like the middle of the field stuff, when you talk about the arm, I like Jaden Daniels, and he has a really good deep ball, but his deep ball is more outside the numbers, where you don't need a rocket arm to throw a go route. You really don't. It's more about placement, timing, and things like that. But I think Drake May, like the way he can layer throws, he can hit those deep posts if somebody wants to bite on like a crosser, those kinds of things, I think would work so well in a McVay type of scheme. There's always the question of how he'd work under center. The Rams run a ton of under center. That's going to be a question with almost any college quarterback you bring in, to be fair. Like Jaden Daniels, they also run a lot of pistol. I think pistol would suit Jaden Daniels very, very well because that's kind of a scheme where you can incorporate some of the read stuff because you have the element of you can turn your back to the defense and you have the back where it's, similar to that dot formation where it's just directly behind the quarterback. I kind of like those better because if the running back is offset left or right, it kind of gives you a tell to what's happening. Sometimes coordinators kind of mess with that because they'll have him move last minute and kind of force confusion or some last adjustments. But I would say Drake May 100%. He just feels like he would be such a perfect fit because watching him, it's hard for me not to think of like a more risky Matt Stafford.
Yep.
Like he's got the ability to throw those side arms and like the different arm slots and things like that. And I think a lot of his game, I mean, everybody says like Herbert and Josh Allen, and I see those comparisons as well, but just looking at what Stafford does on the field outside of his just insane eye manipulation, which Drake May does to a degree, but it's more when he has certain types of matchups where Stafford just does it at like the highest level for like right up there with Mahomes. But yeah, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but yeah, I think it's Drake.
Kind of like Stafford, but put maybe Josh Allen's brain in his head because he has those,
The golden retriever mindset.
chaotic plays where he's trying to hurdle someone or, doing one of those weird shovel passes. But yeah, I agree. I think May would be a great fit in that system. Daniels would be interesting because you'd assume he'd be best in like more of a spread where you can use his legs and get out. And McVay's obviously those tighter splits, but I think he might still be able to manage it and make it work. But I think, yeah, that would pretty much be Drake May's bread and butter there in that offense. But let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball pretty quickly because they're still trying to fill out that staff and that side of the things. And it looks like that might be done first here, maybe at the end of this week or over the weekend. And that's because DeMarcus Covington looks like the strong favorite to be the defensive coordinator. Obviously, he's worked here a while, since 2017. He's been the D-line coach the last 4 or 5 years, which was their best unit last year. He's worked linebackers with Mayo in 2019. So he got a feel for the defense beyond just in the trenches. And then he's been an up-and-coming kind of candidate here. He had 2 DC interviews last year. He worked as a defensive coordinator at the Senior Bowl, where he got a lot of praise from Jim Nagy and some of the coaches and players down there. So this seemed like right away, as long as he didn't follow Bill, this seemed like the most sense. And, he obviously has the familiarity with Gerard and what he wants to do. And it seems like they're headed in that direction with Covington here as the DC.
Yeah, he seemed like the favorite really the entire time. It was kind of like Steve and DeMarcus were like, all right, one of these guys is probably going to get the coordinator job. Steve has been the one calling plays for this defense like forever. It's not in his job description. You wouldn't know unless you ask somebody who follows the team very, very closely. And, I was talking to Brett Coleman the other day, and he's like, yeah, I talk to people all the time. And I'm like, do you know who the coordinator is for New England? And a lot of people are like, I have no idea. And as we know, Gerard was basically the coordinator, did everything but call plays, and that was Steve's job. But DeMarcus Covington, I know players have said that he could coach the line, he could coach linebackers, he could coach the secondary. Again, he's been in this defense for so long that he's got a lot of experience. He knows it inside and out, commands respect, is a beloved guy in that locker room, as someone who's already gotten attention in terms of being a defensive coordinator. I think he interviewed with the Cardinals and the Chargers last year. And then, like you mentioned, Jim Nagy, they were saying that because at the Senior Bowl, it was the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl, one or the other. I always get them mixed up. The Senior Bowl.
It was confusing last year because the Patriots staff was at the Shrine Bowl, but Covington was at the Senior Bowl, and it was just It was a mess. But
right, but like the ability to condense like a really big playbook and get guys up to speed quickly, and also just work together with people, and it's a staff of people that you're not familiar with, and that's where you got praise. And those are the things you want to see in a defensive coordinator. And a lot of the role that Mayo would have, I assume, would fall to DeMarcus Covington, and I think he's ready. Players are confident in him. If he's got all this experience, I don't see why it wouldn't be him. And at some point, he's trying to get a head coaching job. So this just seems like the next step, especially he could take a coordinator job elsewhere. But if you have an opening where you're at, it just makes too much sense. And I'm excited about it. I really would be, pretty psyched to see what he can do in that role.
Yeah. I know a lot of people don't like, they get mad at this point with the continuity and just promote it from internal. But if there was ever a time to do it, like this is the guy to do it with, because he's on that path, and just the continuity with Mayo is key here. And like, even I think Phil Perry said when he was at the Shrine Bowl, like he got up in front of the room and like kind of did what Mayo did here, and like introduces the game plan and told these guys a pitch and like got him going. So he can lead, and he's that type of guy. But you did mention Steve. It looks like the door is still open for him and Brian to return. Mike Reese had it in his Sunday notes, which was like last week already. The days are all over the place. But he said Brian was still in the facility working. He added on Twitter that, Steve might come back in this kind of like assistant to the head coach or kind of advisor role to keep him in the building. So I mean, they might not even get the chance to follow their dad now, right? If he gets kind of squeezed out of that Atlanta.
Very interesting. What kind of domino effect that would start. Yeah.
Yeah. But looks like maybe Steve and Brian could be back. And I mean, I think they're 2 good coaches. So like, why not keep them back and keep that defensive side of the ball intact as much as possible there?
The defense was the only reason they were competitive in games. Like, they entered all but 2 fourth quarters with a very legitimate chance to win games. And almost every time, they got the offense the ball with the last possession with the chance to win the game, and the offense just kept poo-pooing all over themselves. So that side of the ball, you want to keep, I think, as much continuity as possible, like you mentioned. Steve, I mean, he's been calling the defense. Like we already said it. I think it's pretty clear cut. And he has a great relationship with Gerard Mayo. Even going back to when Gerard was a player, because he ended up on injured reserve, I think it was 3 times, might have been 3 years in a row. Every time he was helping, because a lot of times when players end up on injured reserve, they basically become assistant coaches, and they help with game plans. They'll look at certain situations, if it's third down, red zone, whatever, and help scouting and things like that. And he worked with Steve a lot. They got really close there. Gerard obviously goes into business after his playing career, then comes back and coaches. And then he and I think it was supposed to be Greg Schiano was supposed to be the coordinator when Mayo got there in 2019 because he ended up going to back to Ohio State. It ended up being Gerard and Steve, and that's kind of when they started to run the defense. So there's just so much continuity there. Even if Bill leaves, I don't see the advantage of leaving and going to a different place when you have a family here and you have a great relationship with the guy who's now in charge. If you want a head coaching job, if you're a senior advisor or, whatever title they want to give him, I'm sure they're going to give him whatever it is that's like right under head coach. So if he's got those aspirations, I think he'd probably do himself more favors doing it in an organization where he's comfortable and knows everything and everyone knows him and, under someone like Mayo versus just following his dad. And then you really have no idea what's going to happen in that situation. The Falcons have a really talented defense, but there's no guarantee you're going to have the same success, although the division over there is much weaker in the NFC South. So I think Steve staying makes all the sense in the world. Brian, we don't know quite as much about just because he's been the safeties coach, but he also has been, I think he was a linebackers coach or defensive line coach. I think it was linebackers coach, right? Sometime in the past.
I believe so. He's bounced around. They've all bounced around on that side of the ball.
And they like to cross-train. So, he's another guy who's got a lot of experience. He could maybe be the successor if they want for Steve as someone who, like Steve, has so much experience in this defense. Eventually, Covington's going to leave. Eventually, Steve's going to leave. And Brian's somebody who's probably sneaking under the radar because, you're not hearing about him getting interviews for DC or anything like that. So, keep that pipeline going. You want to bottom line, you want to keep continuity on defense because especially if you get a young quarterback, we talk about how offense is dominating the NFL and all that, but that's not really true because if you look around the league, last year you could probably say that, where you had all these crazy shootouts all the time. It hasn't been the same this season. You look at the Ravens, like Mike McDonald has been single-handedly shutting down the McVay and Shanahan trees and doing obviously he's got elite defense, but he's been having the success going back to Michigan. So defense still wins you games in this league. And if you have an offense, it's going to have to catch up and, might go through a little identity crisis as they figure things out. You want a defense that knows each other, that's hearing the messages from the same types of people, and to be able to go in the next season, at least having that in your back pocket.
Yep. You want to keep as many good coaches in the building as possible during this. And those two guys are good coaches. So try to keep them if you can. The last note on the defensive side of the ball, they interviewed Gerald Alexander for the defensive coordinator position. He is an assistant defensive backs coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers the last 2 years. This kind of screamed like their offensive coordinator search last year, where they're just looking for guys to maybe join DeMarcus Covington's staff here. And you have a guy who coaches defensive backs. I mean, he coached DBs in Miami under Josh Boyer and Brian Flores, right? So obviously he can coach that similar style of system. So maybe if Mike Pellegrino leaves, follows Bill, and maybe if I know which would be crushing, and maybe Brian takes on a new role, they could look to bring Alexander in here for some role in that secondary to fill some of those guys' shoes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they also interviewed Christian Parker, who's the defensive backs coach for the Broncos. So you start to think there's going to be a lot of change on the staff. Are they just going to combine and just have a defensive backs coach, period, and not safeties and cornerbacks? Because the Patriots defensive backs end up playing a little bit of everything. Like Miles Bryant is a Swiss Army knife. He plays in the slot, but that slot role specifically, depending on the package and the look you get, and just kind of, I asked Kyle Duggar how they decide, when there's going to be him in the slot and then you kick Miles Bryant back when you want to have a too high zone. And he's like, yeah, it's kind of just how we're feeling. Like, there doesn't seem to be a rhyme and reason. It's kind of just, I'm sure he also didn't want to spill the beans, but if you play certain roles in the defense, you end up doing everything. Sometimes if they get a look where it's a nub look, where it's just the tight end isolated to one side and three receivers to the other, what they'll do a lot of the time is they'll have a safety come down and play more of like a cloud defense where you can jam that guy and the safety plays short, and they have the corner actually playing safety because they're rangier. So then it kind of gives you that security where you also get physicality at the line. So there's so much mixing and matching in the secondary that it would make sense if you just put it all under one umbrella and said, hey, defensive backs, we're all just getting on the same page here. I'm not sure how they run meetings necessarily, if there is kind of a joint effort already, because they all have to be on the same page so much. But yeah, it's going to be really cool to see how the staff changes, whether they also, like, I think it's interesting, Michael Hodges, he's somebody I wanted to mention earlier, where I ended up stealing your tweet. I sent it out and then was looking through my notifications. I was like, oh my God, Brian said this like 10 minutes ago. But Michael Hodges and DeMarcus Covington were co-defensive coordinators at Eastern Illinois. Very clear continuity there. So another guy you can get down the pipeline where if DeMarcus leaves and they got a good relationship, you're just kind of keeping guys in the system who are also young. So, even if some guys get attention for defensive coordinator, head coach, you can keep that pipeline going with the guys that they brought in who have a lot of ties to the Patriots, kind of the opposite of the offense, where it seems like they're trying to get as far away from their own system as possible. So, I really, really like the guys they've been bringing in to interview. I think there's some interesting candidates. Again, young guys who are every single guy you see in the notifications. It's like
30,
young
like
risers,
mid-30s,
mid-30s, really well respected. Like these aren't just young guys who it's like, oh, it's a youth revolution. These are people who the league sees as really talented, smart, communicative coaches. So I'm excited to see how the staff actually fills out. Offense obviously, particularly on defense, because if Bill does leave, some guys might jettison, and if he doesn't, again, the domino effect of if Bill doesn't get a head coaching job, two guys end up staying, and then you don't even need to have all these transitions. If Pellegrino stays, and you don't need this overhaul. So we're still in the thick of it, where it's just a lot of speculation and if this, then that. But a lot of balls in the air. But I like who they're bringing in.
Yep. It feels like the Falcons need to hire a coach for these parts to really kind of get moving and these last pieces to come together. But yeah, anytime you hear one of these reports, it's like people who are either fans of the team or cover the team on Twitter have just nothing but praise about all these coaches. And, Hodges is a linebackers coach with the Saints. So, they need a new linebackers coach because that was Gerard's job. And then you talked about these two guys in the secondary, like maybe they combine. That would be really interesting. I know Alexander actually played safety in the league, so maybe he just takes more of a safety role. But they have a lot of paths that this defensive staff could kind of go. And I know, again, as you said, we all want to focus on the offense, but this defensive staff could be really interesting to see how it comes together. So let's take a very quick break. We'll hear from our friends over at FanDuel, and then we'll talk about burning some cash and spending some money.
All right, let's do it.
NFL season is wrapping up, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Now, the app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so Gerard Mayo had his first radio interview on Monday as the new Patriots head coach, and the big thing was, he was asked about, does he have leeway to spend money from ownership? And he said, we're burning some cash and we're bringing in talent and we are spending money. My brain first went to the scene of the Joker in The Dark Knight of lighting all the money on fire on the boat or whatever they were. Then my brain went to, well, kind of duh, they have to spend money because they have so much cap space, right? And they're kind
literally have to.
They're kind of at that 3-year window where they have to reach a floor, I believe, of spending money, and they just need talent. So, and then, as I thought about it a little more, I hope they actually don't burn money and they more spend money wisely. And this isn't a 2021 kind of thing where they're just throwing as much money out here. And I think they're looking at this differently. I think they looked at 2021 as, let's throw a lot of money out there and try to build this up, quickly. Like, we'll take the short-term approach, which, kind of worked. They got back to the playoffs, and then it kind of fell apart from there. But now you have a young coach. You may be looking at more of a longer rebuild here. So, you got to spend money, you got to bring in talent, but let's do it wisely here and not just throw bags at people for the sake of throwing money at people.
Exactly. I think 2021 needs to be the blueprint of let's make sure we're allocating cash well. You can even go back to last season, like the Devontae Parker extension. Obviously, I think it's forgotten, and it's different if you weren't really there, but we were watching in practice over the summer every day. Like, he was the one who was making most of the big plays. Yep. At least once a day, you're seeing him catch his crazy deep pass. It's like, okay, they have their wide receiver one where he's consistently winning on slants. He was like smoking Christian Gonzalez to the point where I asked Mike Pellegrino, like, Is, what's that been like? Is he able to learn from Devontae Parker? And he was like, yeah, no, he's making, rookie mistakes and Devontae's helping him. But now that looks really bad, especially when you consider that all on the field, like the effort throughout the season wasn't really there. And it's like, all right, so like, what are you seeing behind the scenes? Was there no indication that this might be a problem? Then you got Juju, obviously, where, on the outside, it seems like, all right, they got their yak guy. They got their chain mover, kind of like a Jacoby Myers, where they're, believe it or not, they're like similar ages, actually. They're not that far apart just because Juju was so young when he got in the league. But the tread on his tires was a concern. But we didn't know how bad it was until we actually saw him on the field. And we're like, oh, he's shot. Like, this dude is really still reeling from the knee injuries, it was hinted at in OTAs. And then you see, like, he battles injury throughout the season, ends up on injured reserve. So it's the biggest thing is you can't give a lot of money to guys with bad contracts you can't get out of. Because now the Patriots are looking at Parker and Juju. I'm sure they're at least considering moving on from them and trying to get some young, more explosive talent. But it's, okay, who's going to take him in a trade? I think it's after June 1st or June 2nd or something like that, so that you don't end up just incurring a ton of dead money unnecessarily. Now, they have enough that, if there aren't a lot of guys that they necessarily want to throw the bag at, maybe it kind of helps them a little bit where you take some of that off. Because frankly, and I'm sure we're going to go through this, but with a lot of these free agents, the names that a lot of Patriots fans want, I'm not really sure are going to make it to market. And even if they do, there's going to be stiff competition. And even if you try to throw a bag at them, it's okay. Well, for Mike Evans, for example, is he going to want to stay with Baker and continue the continuity and retire a Buccaneer? Or is he going to be like, oh, no, I want to cash out in my last few years in the league and just take, whatever money I can get. So it's going to be interesting to see how they allocate it. But I hope that Matt Groh and Elliott Wolf are not the ones responsible for some of the poorer choices, and we're gonna find out very soon.
Yep. And I see a lot of names coming in the chat. Calvin Ridley, someone down here, Calvin Ridley again, Marquise Brown, and Ashton brings up the point like Higgins, Evan, or Pittman. You talked about Mike Evans there quickly, but T. Higgins and Michael Pittman seem like prime franchise tag candidates, right? Like, will they even get to the open market? Because, I know the Bengals, they paid Joe Burrow. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. Do they want to pay T. Higgins a big 4 or 5 year deal? Maybe not, but they're also in their Super Bowl window right now. So if you can extend that for a year and then figure it out later, they're probably going to do that. And Michael Pittman, they just used the 4th overall pick on Anthony Richardson. You think they're probably going to want to keep his number 1 receiver in town. So those two would be my, like, if they're there, throw the bag at them. Like, those guys would be great fits here. If you can get, one of those guys, pair them with Pop in the slot, and then there's so many good of like these mid-round kind of moves, wide receivers in the draft. That'd be a great trio, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. So how are you feeling Calvin Ridley, Marquise Brown, or maybe another receiver we're not talking about?
Yeah, so I'm going to cheat sheet real quick, and I'll go with a friend of CLNS, Brad Spielberger at PFF, does a great job, with the numbers and the free agency and all that. So after T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, and Mike Evans, who I talked about, like, if you could throw a bag at him and he comes, there's soft tissue injuries, he's old, he'll drop some easy passes. Those are the bad things, but he also makes incredible plays. He's got Super Bowl and playoff experience. He's a leader. He's one of the greatest receivers in history. I think he's a great guy to get in your room and at least be able to say, okay, he's going to set the example that everybody else follows. And, the value he brings, especially behind the scenes, on top of still being a good player, is enormous. Marquise Brown is a guy where he's kind of repetitive, I feel like, with Pop, especially considering with the McVay type offense, you like bigger receivers because they use a lot of 11 personnel or 3 wide receiver sets. So you like those guys to be bigger and be able to like dig out safeties and really contribute in the run game. That's more of like a Kendrick Bourne. I think Marquise Brown is somebody that you want away from the formation when it comes to stuff like that. And if you have him and Pop and you're probably going to have to pay Marquise Brown, I don't really know how well that's going to mesh. Calvin Ridley is still very explosive. He's still a playmaker. I thought he had a drop problem, and I actually had to go back and look at, like, all right, what was the quality of the drops? I overrated them, frankly, and I think he's still a big play threat. But at the same time, he's almost 30 years old. So, I'm not sure how much you want to invest in a guy who's 30. Like, Mike Evans is a different story. Like, Mike Evans is Mike Evans. Mostly, but traditionally with guys who are hitting 30, I don't know if you really want to pay them necessarily. Then you got Darnell Mooney, who reminds me of Tyquan Thornton a little bit. He's not the same. He's a much better route runner, but he's a guy who's injury prone. He's kind of thin. You need to protect him so he doesn't have to deal with press a lot. He's not great. Tyler Boyd, honestly, is probably the guy. Not that I think he's explosive or anything, but in terms of guys who I'd like to bring in because he's a leader, he's ultra reliable, a kind of guy where I think a rookie would really like having him as a security blanket. Maybe use him as more of a Z, but maybe that overlaps with Kendrick Bourne. I think the moral of the story here is that the receiver market is not as good as we might think it is. It's pretty rough. Like there is a steep drop off.
Top two guys don't even make the market, then there's that kind of steep drop there. But
I think it's like your best case scenario is maybe trying to find a non-first round pick and trade for a guy like Ayuk. Maybe you package something and then you're like, all right, we'll pay him long term, but it's not looking pretty, honestly. You're probably more getting like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 kind of guys than you are to get the bona fide playmaker you want.
Yeah. And there's always a receiver that feels that comes up on the trade market, right? Like we never thought Tyreek Hill would get traded. So maybe in Philly, AJ Brown or Devontae Smith wants out, or I don't know what Dallas is going to do. I have a hard time thinking they'll move on from CeeDee Lamb, but he's in that spot where he's playing on his 5th-year option now, so he's going to need an extension. So maybe one of those.
And we know Matt Groh's willing to pay for those guys. He said it when they got Thornton. I really do not think that he had Thornton in mind when he was thinking about this necessarily, but he was saying like, yeah, if you want big receivers or big name receivers and playmakers like that, you got to be aggressive and you got to go get them. So it's going to be kind of cool to see if they do try to make one of those big moves that we haven't seen Bill make in the past where, yeah, you're giving up a lot of capital. Yeah, you're giving up a lot of money on top of that. But these are guys that help get you to the playoffs and help you make legitimate pushes, especially with a young quarterback kind of just being a guy where you might not have the most accurate pass or the best decision and they can still bail you out.
Yep. Obviously not trading number 3, but maybe 34. Like that's basically a late first-round pick, so we'll see if one of those guys tends to shake out there. But yeah, the free agent wide receiver class is a little disappointing, but luckily the draft is full of really good talents.
Stacked.
Yeah, I was going through the Senior Bowl receivers today, and it was just one after another. And that's not even like these top guys like the Marvin Harrisons and Malik Neighbors that we all know. It's a bunch of guys who will be in that Patriots kind of 2nd, 3rd round range. So there's a ton of good options here. Moving off receivers, Claude asked in the chat, if we can't re-sign Zeke, are you interested in Saquon at all?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think it needs to be modest. Like, you have money. If you can't get a receiver and you can't get, like, the tight end market isn't great. I like Dalton Schultz. I like Noah Fant. I don't like anybody else. If you want a difference-making pass catcher, Saquon Barkley, as long as he's healthy, can be your Christian McCaffrey. That might sound crazy. It's not. You saw it. There was the game before the Giants played the Patriots. I think it was the Commanders where he had like 2 crazy catches deep along the sideline. Like Saquon is a legitimate receiver, especially the Patriots. Like, you have Ramondre and he's solid as a receiver. He'll give you a lot of production. But Saquon can be that guy where you use him as a legitimate mismatch piece. And I think can kind of make everybody better, get attention off others. So hell yeah, man. If he wants to come here, I think that I heard on Underdog, Josh Norris and Hayden Winks mentioned that he could go to the Texans, which I think would probably be more ideal for him. Because it's a system where like they have a good offensive line already. They got a young quarterback. They got a ton of money. They'd make sense. But yeah, man, if you want to throw a bag at Saquon, I have no issues with that.
Just like, I know we all have our needs, like tackle, receiver. Obviously, there's things they need to, bring in talent. But like, you want to keep coaches in the building, like good coaches in the building. You also want to get good players in the building and pay these guys good players. So even if it's not a position of need, like there's so many good defensive linemen in free agency. And you look at it like, oh, we already have Christian Barmore, but what if you got another really good guy and put him next to Christian Barmore and make that unit even better? So, like, spend this. There's obviously needs and positions they need to check off that are a priority, but pay good players and they will help your team win. But we're talking a lot about kind of the external free agents, a lot of internal free agents. Who do you want to see them? I think we all know who is at the top of our list, but who do you want to see this kind of cash and money get spent to kind of keep around guys that are already on the team?
Well, I'll name the obvious ones. Christian Barmore, extend him as soon as possible. I think that he should be the one who sets what your salary cap actually looks like, where you make sure that you take care of him, especially with Covington becomes your defensive coordinator and all the work he's put into developing Christian Barmore, all the work that Barmore's done. He absolutely deserves to be rewarded. Another homegrown guy who's been really good for you, Mike Nwenu. Never complains, really came up as a leader this season, with all the injuries and all the turmoil that went on throughout the season. Gives you flexibility. Like, he's just a prototypical Patriot. I don't think you say, oh, but he doesn't fit our scheme. He's a really good player, and there aren't a lot of good offensive linemen, especially ones that want to come here that. So I would say those two guys are at the top of the list. Anthony Jennings, I saw that Brad Spielberger had him making less than $6 million per year on like a longer deal. He may not be a pass rusher. He gives you a little bit of something on like stunts and if you let him crash inside, but he's someone who consistently gets you negative plays on early downs. That's invaluable because that gets an offense behind schedule, allows the defense to dictate, and he's also somebody that you cannot consistently run at. Where you can kind of a little overcompensate on the backside if you need to, because if it's a critical situation, they're not going to run it Anthony, and if they do, they're going to pay for it. So he's someone, so I think he's a lock. Like, you have to bring him back. Miles Bryant, I think people started to appreciate him. I've been singing his praises like since last year. I thought he got way too much crap a few years ago when there was that Bills game, and everyone's like, "Oh, he can't cover Isaiah McKenzie." You're right, he can't, and it's not his fault the defense didn't adjust. I remember I said it in the game, and then Devin McCourty said after the game, he's like, yeah, we should have adjusted better. Like, yeah, no crap, you should have adjusted better. Like, you see him do it more where they'll use cut coverages where Miles Bryant will place the safety in the middle of the field, and then they just get leverage on the guy and have the safety crash down, stuff like that. But he's just so reliable. He's so versatile. He's smart. He's tough. He's well respected. And frankly, he's going to come cheap. I haven't even seen him on any lists of like free agents and top guys or anything like that. So those are my big guys I really want to bring back. Kyle Duggar, if you franchise tag him, because I think you need to see what he can do if you put him and let him play to his strengths. He played deep way too much. I also think that in coverage, he had a lot of lapses that he got. I know there was that one game where he was sick, and it was a bit of an anomaly in his career. So, franchise, see if he bounces back. He's going to be also, I think, 28, 29.
28, yeah.
28, yeah, something like that. So, I mean, it's kind of dark, but I mean, if you franchise him and then he hits the market at 29, like, you're going to get him for even cheaper, most likely, even if he plays well. That's just the reality of the business. Even though those guys can play kind of, especially the freak athletes, can play into their 30s. So, franchise Duggar. Josh Uche, I don't know, man. It's tough because he doesn't really get to play to his strengths since they play so much contained and they really try to be responsible with their pass rushes against good mobile quarterbacks. But I also just thought that he wasn't nearly as impressive as he was the season before. And that was the one time where you saw him consistently produce at a high level as a rotational pass rusher. He doesn't even play every snap. Like, I think if they want to do that, go get Bryce Huff. If you want a situational guy who's going to I think he was like third in quick pressure rate behind Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett. So I also think that anytime I watch an interview, I'm like, I think Josh Uche is coming back. I think Mayo likes him. I think he really likes the organization.
He said
he probably isn't going to command a lot of money.
He was on with like Tom Curran, and he was. Yeah. I mean, we always known he's praised Mayo a lot in the past. He really likes Mayo, but he was on Tom Curran's podcast, and I think Tom asked him point blank, like, "Do you want to come back?" And he was like, "Yeah, I want to play under Mayo." But then he's like, a lot can happen with agents and everything, so we'll kind of see how that goes.
Yeah, and realistically, he's probably only going to get a 1-year deal. Like, I don't think anybody's going to be like, yeah, we'll give you 2-3 years. He needs to prove that he can, maybe this was a slump and see which of the past 2 seasons is the real Josh Uche. So he's someone where, like, if he comes cheap for sure, but, extend Barmore, get Jennings and Nwenu back in the building, franchise Duggar, bring Miles Bryant, I feel like is kind of a no-brainer re-signing. Those are really the big guys. Also, Hunter Henry. I feel like that's a pretty obvious one. They don't have a tight end. Mayo listed him as an offensive leader, even though he is going to be a free agent. So he's also someone I don't think is going to command a lot of money. It's a shallow free agent market at that position. But I also think that, I don't think any team is going to look at him and say, we got to pay this guy. We got to get him in our building. I think he's more valuable to the Pats than anybody else. So, yeah, I throw him into the mix as well.
Yeah. Hunter, we get it. He's not an explosive guy. He has his warts as a run blocker, but you have a rookie quarterback. You need a reliable guy at that position, and he's probably the best tight end on the open market. Maybe Dalton Schultz, one of those two guys, kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe kind
of pairing would be awesome. I'd love that. Two of them together.
But I'd like, if you're staying in that tight end room, I think if you get like Hunter Henry, bring Pharaoh Brown back, who, he had a very good year. He'll probably be pretty cheap. You could bring back and then get like a mid-round tight end in the draft because you got to get some youth in there and start to progress one of these guys. Someone like Jaheim Bell from Florida State, he'll be at the Senior Bowl. He's just like one of these pure athletic tight ends. Maybe that'd be an intriguing pair, but kind of be interesting to see how they address that tight end room. But yeah, I think you hit it on most of those guys. Duggar will be the interesting one just because of his coverage issues and his age. It seems like the franchise tag could really be in play there. We'll kind of see though. On Winu, I know there was that report from it was ESPN, I believe, that the Patriots kind of assumed he was gone, that they weren't going to bring him back. But
I don't know where that came from.
Which was weird to me. And then Phil Perry reported this morning, he had it in an article, I believe, that there's a real affinity for Onwenu's game in the building, and they'd like to have him back in Foxborough for 2024 and beyond. So that was an encouraging update. And you'd like to have him because he's a good offensive lineman, and this offensive line doesn't need a full rebuild with some of those young guys, but they need as many talented bodies up there as possible. And Onwenu is one of those guys.
Yeah, Sophie Weller, A to Z Sports, got it straight from the horse's mouth. She got from Onwenu that he wants to come back and he wants to be in the building. So, yeah, I respect all these sources. These guys are in the business and they have the roles they have for a reason. But I don't know where the hell that came from because it doesn't compute with anything that we've heard or seen or that is just logical. Like, why in the world would you, if you don't like him at tackle, fine, put him at guard where he should be. But, yeah, I don't think it would make any sense. And if, in this new era where you want to get players respect and everything, I don't see how Gerard Mayo lets somebody like Onwenu, who has no, there's no negatives really.
Yeah.
He's respected. He's usually very healthy. The one time he wasn't healthy, he played as much as he could, had offseason surgery, and then played as much as he could for the stretch down the season. So, yeah, it's just such a no-brainer. I don't see why they ever consider letting him walk.
Definitely agree with you there. But, I mean, that stuff's going to pick up soon, right? We have our coaching staff, which should be in place in the next maybe 2 weeks, and then draft and free agency. So this cash will be burnt soon, pretty much. They can start extending these guys now, the internal guys. So,
yep.
I mean, we'll see. I don't know if they'll probably wait till the coaching staff is together to do that. But anything else like from Mayo on EEI on Monday that kind of stood out to you, or anything else that we didn't talk about?
I feel like we kind of hit everything. I'm trying to think. It was also that feels like a million years
so
ago.
long ago.
Especially because every day I feel like we get just these notifications at the most inopportune times. I'll be sitting on the couch trying to relax at 9:00, and I'm sitting next to Liz, and then I'm running to get my laptop, and she's like, "Something happened." I'm like, "Yep."
It's either before 9 a.m. or after 9 p.m. It's I was watching the Bruins game the other night and it ends, and I'm like, all right, probably time for bed. And then Bill O'Brien's going to Ohio State. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's chaos. But Gerard Mayo, he wanted it on the record. We'll end here. He wanted it on the record that they would win over 4 games next season. Are you believing in that? I know it's way too early to say anything. But are you buying or selling that? I'm going to put you on the record too on January 24th.
If they keep continuity on defense, yes. Because I think a rookie who's talented and has a better supporting cast will do better than Mac Jones with his brain falling out of his head. I don't mean to be rude to Mac. I feel like I always have to give this caveat of he's super respectful to us. I like him as a person, but as a player, kind of fell off a cliff. So, and then you even saw with Zappy, whoever comes in should be better than what you got from Bailey Zappi. And they started ripping off some wins towards the end of the season. And that was when you lost Strange, you lost Hunter Henry, you lost Ramondre Stevenson. You didn't have Kendrick Bourne. Honestly, I think we always talk about the rebuild and how long it's going to take, but look how close they were at the end of the season when we always talked about it. They have no business winning these games, and everyone's talking about rock bottom, rock bottom. They found a new rock bottom almost every week in the last month and a half of the season and still found ways to stay competitive and even win games, albeit against a few not great teams. But I think they should be better. I also said that they were gonna, be better than they were in 2022 and 2023. And look, egg on my face. But I mean, they're making the changes, so I sure hope they're better than 4 wins.
Yeah. I mean, it's been an encouraging week, I'll say, but there's a lot of time to go. But Amit, clip that. Taylor says the Patriots playoffs next year. They will be better under Gerard Mayo. But Taylor, thank you so much for filling in today. Everyone, make sure you go follow him on Twitter at tkyles39. You can obviously catch him on the Patriots Press Pass channel. Read all his work at CLNS.com. He'll be on later today at 5 o'clock, I believe.
Yep, going to be talking college QBs with Derek Class, and very excited about that.
So obviously tune into that. Sure, we'll be talking all those QBs that are going at number 3 overall in the draft. Barth and I should be back, and hoping he has his voice back tomorrow, Thursday. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn your notifications on so you do know when we go live. We'll probably do some Q&A, I'm guessing, so make sure you come put some questions in the chat for us. You can also follow me on Twitter at I am Brian Hines, and go read all the offseason coverage for the Patriots over at patspulpit.com. Taylor, thanks again for joining us, and thank you everyone else for tuning in, and we will see you guys tomorrow.